and welcome. My name is Mary Lou and you're listening to the Hear a Hotspot podcast. This week, June and I are joined by our friend Jane Grose, where we are sharing our thoughts on religion and the church. Jane recognises that all faiths began with a simple foundation, that of love. We look at how that ties into leading a spiritual life. Where religion tends to have barriers and doctrines, there is a personal freedom in spirituality where you are able to follow your own path and discover your best self. But coming from a structured religion to the freedom of following your own path can sometimes feel like a betrayal for some. We are then led into talking about the next generation and what their future looks like, both spiritually and personally. I hope you enjoy it. So there is a danger when we've spoken before about some people who may be interested in a spiritual life are potentially coming from an already organised religious standpoint where it's either Christianity, so God, or Allah, or Buddha, or can't think of any more. But, and one of the questions I have received from family are like, well, how come you've got them all there? Why is this not, it confuses them. It's not an organised faith. And I see them, I don't know how other people see them, but I see them as ascended masters, people of sort of divine clarity and power and light that have come down to inform us and are still there to inform us. But I don't know very much about each of them individually. I know obviously the Buddha is Buddhism. So what can you share about some
those
of
other
them?
things? I think it's exactly what you're saying is an interesting thing about the way people move from, say, organised religion to trying to find something else. And it really reflects more on organised religion because there are, within organised religion, let's take Christianity as an example, but there are many others. It's full of definites. It's full of, this is the way you have to live your life. And there is one God. And there is, Jesus was the Son of God, and Jesus was, and therefore was guided by God. Now, there's been lots of work been done on this particular subject, and if you take Christianity as an example, I think there are many people who desperately need rules by which to live their life. You could call that, if you want to be negative about it, a certain lack of imagination, or you could call it a huge comfort to so many people because the world is a frightening place, and if they're told what to do, they're fine. And so I deeply respect people who choose. In some ways, I'm a little bit jealous of people who choose a way of life and a God and say, this is my path.
Do you not think to a degree that's a little, while I agree with you, it's a little disempowering because it stops them having to actually process and think, what do I feel? Literally feel, what do I intuit about things?
Hugely. But that is a life choice and it's very, very safe. The difficulty comes when people say, my way is the right way and everybody else who doesn't think like that needs to be horribly massacred in one way or another. And that has been the state through history. And certainly it has been with Islam, with the extremes of Islam, certainly with Christianity, the extremes of Christianity. And sadly now we see it with Buddhism, although we have to say about Buddhism that that's not about God, because Buddha is not a God.
No.
And Buddha was a man, the Siddhartha, who to simplify it, sat under a tree and reached enlightenment and came out with a set of laws. If you look at all religions of the world, they all teach the same thing. And the thing that they teach is love. And that is the position from which, if we could all be born without any kind of influence of religion at all, that would be a good starting point to try and find your path in life. I don't think it matters which path you choose, as long as you question and it doesn't become a doctrine. It doesn't become, this is the way you have to do it. I think provided you start from a position of love and that you use some of the teachings of each of those religious ways to be able to say, yes, I'd rather do this than that. And it should always come from a position of love. So if we take something like Buddhism, that's a set of rules by which to live your life. And Hinduism as well is a set of rules by which to live your life. And the way that you try and interpret the way you try and interpret those rules is about the questioning and being able to say, okay, is my initial motivation love? So in Buddhism, it's very much about the fact, this interconnectedness of life, that we are all at one, that you should respect all living beings. There is a prayer in Buddhism that says, I take refuge in the Buddha, which is if you like, a figurehead, the Dharma, and the messages that the Buddha left, and the Sangha, which is all of our people, to get all the Buddhists together, working together for a better world, in order to reach enlightenment. And so we are all moving towards some stage where we would like to say that we are ready to move on to whatever there is next. And in order to do this in this prayer, it says, through the practice of forgiveness and compassion, may I reach the state of Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. That's, the wasp, the bumblebee, was it? That's everything. That's being able to benefit all sentient beings. And for me, that's the way I would like to see that I live my life, that there's respect, that there's forgiveness, that there's compassion, and there's love. It's incredibly hard, and we are all bound to fail from the first hurdle. It's a really hard thing to do. So that's Buddhism is about forgiveness and compassion, and the fact that all human beings are trying to find happiness and avoid suffering. And that's a truism of the whole world too. That's what we're all trying to do. Yeah, we're all trying to do that. And so they're all universal facts in Buddhism. And that's partly why I like it, is because it's sort of the universality of how we should live our lives. If you look at something like Hinduism, then they have multiple gods, and they are gods of good and gods of evil. And in some ways, the way Hinduism has helped people that follow it is that it's absolutely a set of laws about the way you live your life, and they're quite rigid. A lot of them are quite rigid, but they also have many festivals to each of these gods, which gave people who had nothing a bit of a day off, something to look forward to. So that's really, I don't mean to sound patronising in that way, but when I lived amongst Hindus, it was really lovely about the way, we've done Diwali and we're looking forward to the next one, And so festivals are very important because they're ways of looking with people, but they're also, in Hinduism, you have a choice, if you like, about the god that you decide to adopt, because you believe that their way is the messages from that particular god, that deity, really. It isn't a god, it's a deity, you feel a greater connection. It gives you an opportunity to choose amongst values that have slightly different. They have slightly different values. They do. So let's take Ganesh, if you like. Is that he? One of the things that we talk about when we talk about Ganesh is that he removes obstacles in your life and problems. So if you had an obstacle, you would talk to Ganesh. Going back to Christianity, they also have different angels that they talk to. If in certain parts of Christianity, you can talk to Mary. Mary is the person you focus on, and she's the mother. And if you are a mother, often mothers are much more drawn to telling their problems to Mary than they may be to, put it absolutely bluntly, a white man on a cross, because that may be where all their problems stem from, or a white man anyway. So I think if we all want to live a spiritual life, we have the opportunity to make a series of choices about what we need and when we need it. And it doesn't really matter to me who those people are. So I'm a bit of a, tart when it comes to these things, is that, I am deeply committed to Ganesh, because in the times when I've had problems and difficulties in my life, Ganesh has been the person that the deity that I have most related to. But equally, at another time in my life, when I was trying to find a path that would give me a if you like, a sort of mantra or a way of being that I felt comfortable with, then the idea of working towards a state where I could have forgiveness and compassion, and to strive to be able to achieve those things, although, I'm never going to, but to strive to be able to achieve those things from a position of love was a way I wanted to live my life. Equally, when people are disenfranchised by their religion, so they've been brought up in the way of Christianity and have been told nothing but don't, or Islam, where sometimes in certain branches where they've been told nothing but don't, or in Judaism where it's what you can't do. There's a lot of can'ts. They say, I can't make any decisions for myself if I'm constantly being told what I can't do. I want to find out what I can do. So they start to look for something else. So they would come to this world of working with the angels, and you can see why it would be such a relief, because in the world that we work in, there are no you can't do's. None of us sit here and say, oh, I don't think you should do it that way. The one thing that we have, and I get very much from being amongst you all, is the sense of respect. We may all be a bit oddballs to the outside world, but we all have our own place in this world, and there is huge respect, and I really value that more than anything else. It's the thing that I love.
Too.
And they're also there are no don'ts. Now, if you go and talk to a priest, he'll say, oh, no, but we all start from love. And I say, yeah, but what about the position of women? And the whole religion is run by white men, and it's hugely difficult. And the position of women has always been downtrodden. And if you are a woman who's been brought up in any kind of feminism all your life, you cannot accept religion, organised religion, because the Bible was written by a group of white men.
But then when I read the Anna, grandmother of Jesus, it was very much saying that you had 12 disciples, but there was a stage towards the end of Jesus' life where they had to go off and they had to choose women, because it was very much about the 12 women who were the sisterhood of the rose, and then it was all about the 12. So by the end there were 144 of them, and it was as much about the women. It just they didn't write about it, or it wasn't replicated.
But if you absolutely right, and we don't know because we weren't there, and we'll never know really. But what's really important is to say that the people who follow the Christian religion get it all out of the Bible and interpret what they want out of the Bible. And the Bible was written by, a lot of black or white men, or not white men, they were quite a lot, but they were Middle Eastern men. But, that sort of thing, that's what really frightens me. That's where the don'ts come in.
Yeah. But it's in spirituality, you're speaking your own truth.
Exactly.
And then when you speak it, you're doing that in an environment of love and respect and lack of judgment.
Exactly.
But in religion, you're not even speaking their truth. You're just listening to someone else's truth, and you're being restricted by that.
Yeah.
And there is no independent thought, and you're quite rebellious if you are, and at times probably rejected if you actually put your head above a parapet going, I'm just going to question that thing about abortion, or all these different things.
Or
If
if you get raped and when it's time to go home, you don't go because you've been told by the priest that you'll go to hell. because you got raped.
Yeah.
And yet we know now, sadly, that so many of those priests behaved appallingly badly.
Yes.
That so many of the nuns in the orphanages in Ireland behaved so hideously badly.
Terrible.
And all that kind of stuff is just so unbelievably
And
horrible.
they did it in the name of God.
And so this is the trouble, is that unless you go back to the fundamental truth, which is love,
Yep.
and say this is where the starting point is.
And there is only love.
And I think it gives people less at calls, because my mum has said it before. It's hurt me twice in the name of God, or rejected me twice in the name of God. And she used it very much, it was a framework. And I was saying to my dad the other day, because now they're doing online church, but they go to a posh London church online. They won't do the local church online. She's a bit of a snob. But I said, well, actually, there's no point in her going anyway, because she never says a psalm, she never sings, she never, she's utterly mute, doesn't shake anyone's hand, she's not interested. So she uses this structure, she uses God, in my opinion, as a weapon, really, to manipulate and to, to wound.
And let's look at the extremes of Islam.
To beat you with
where
a
you've
stick.
got the horrible stuff with what goes on with saying, ISIS. Let's use ISIS as the example. It's she's I'm not as bad as ISIS, but that extreme of this is the way, ours is the right way. But what the Dalai Lama says, the moment you think you've got Buddhism and you understand it, you've lost it. The moment you think that you're right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important. I think that's fundamental. And that's what's so nice about working with angels, because we're all muddling our way through.
We are.
Some of us get
Even me.
Yeah, because it's a journey.
Yeah.
And we're all trying to.
And I think with that comes a humility, and you don't get the humility in a religion because it is that pious nature of, well, we're right.
Yes,
and actually,
exactly.
I actually now am in a position, even if it's not a priest, even say like my mum, where actually I can tell you what to do. I can judge you because I have the box of church around me. I've got a book that's going to inform and back up my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's why my standing position is often, I really don't know.
Yeah.
I've got this opinion, but I really don't know. I don't know about it. And I hope that the one bit that I have got right is the business about we all come from a position of love. I hope that's...
It is. That's the only bit.
Because that's what everybody talks about. All religions, always, forever. And that's what you get if you come to this. From the purposes of this book, if you like, if we only get one message across, it's saying that if you're looking for love, then you will receive love because you're within a group of people who are just trying their hardest to be as non-judgmental as possible. And that's really, really hard. And I think it's harder for some of us more than others, but really, really hard to do. But that's the position we want to be in. Now, I think lots of people start off that way when they take on a religion, doctrine. But inevitably it gets horribly muddled up. It gets horribly muddled up. And we have to keep challenging ourselves to say, are we right?
Even this stuff. The first thing I'd say to anybody is you have to question it.
Absolutely.
You don't take it, everything I say or anything anybody tells you that's right, that's red for red, that's it.
Yeah.
It isn't.
And it's quite a leap for someone who's come from a very structured environment where they're given the Psalms, they're given this is how many times you've got to do it, this is what you have to say, this is how you have to say it, this is what God will accept and won't accept. To go from that dictatorial, really, or managed environment, and my experience, it was dictatorial. And for some people, as you say, they're quite happy and they need that. They need to have that form in order to feel that they can worship.
Well, it's a bit like a nun, I expect.
It is. Well, that's
where they pray at the different times of the
like I say, for my
day.
mum, you go to church once a week, or, she goes on her knees every night by bed. She's very old-fashioned Catholic. But for some people coming from that, but it's, as you said at the beginning, they're seeking a bit more. Some people feel that they're betraying what they've left.
Absolutely.
And they've actually got to, I've got to drop that in order to do this. But I think sometimes it can, if you need that structure, that's fine. But you can still meditate on top of that without betraying that. Because it's that language or that option has not been in that culture. They feel it's what am I doing if I'm going into that? Is God going to like it, or is that the right thing to do? But as you say, if it's, and I was trying to say to my dad when he was down, he was with him and my husband were talking about fishing and how much they loved it. And I said, really, fishing, when you're doing it for 6 hours after one fish, it's allowed you to think about nothing else. That's your church. That's your meditation. That's where you feel good and you're not stressed and you're loving what you do. That's your church. So, and if meditation does that for you, that can still be part of a church, in inverted commas. And that's what meditation is.
Yeah.
If meditation makes you a better person because you are more loving, you're more forgiving, you're more understanding, you're more connected, then that can be part of any religion.
I think that's true.
Whereas spirituality is not a religion. You're not replacing one with
exactly.
this.
And you can be very spiritual within your religion. I mean, if you listen to the lessons that go on when people are training to be a vicar in the Church of England, let's say, you know, they struggle with all this all the time. You know, they're always beating themselves up about, you know, is this right? What's, you know, and yet they still are willing to stand up every Sunday and several other times of the week and spout this nonsense. They say things like, I am not worthy to gather up the crumbs under your table. Now, I'm not crawling on the ground for anybody, and yet for years at school I read the creed, and the creed is, you know, we're not worthy to gather up the crumbs under your table, and, you know, we're sinners, and we're, I mean, you know,
no, I never read any of that. Are you a Catholic? Was you
I was brought up Church of England, no. Okay. And I was brought up church, well, only because my school was a Church of England school. I never believed in it.
Goodness, they didn't send me then.
I fought like crazy, unfortunately. And there was this thing where you would take communion, and I refused to take communion. There was a huge, I mean, I didn't do well at school, but the huge thing about taking communion, and I refused to take communion because I said, I'm not prepared to accept any of this. I want to be able to understand the world better. And so you have all the people who take communion would be praying all the way through, waiting for their turn to take communion. And then there'd be me still standing up at the back, you know, and I just thinking to myself, I don't know why you're doing this. I cannot get this. And I do believe in, I don't believe, you know, I hate, the moment you start using the word belief, it's so tinged with all this awful stuff.
Yeah.
I have a knowing, which is the word you use, and I think that's much nicer, that I have a knowing that there are bodies, something other that is taking care of me.
Yeah.
I have a sense sometimes that there's something other going on. I talk to God. Every time the first shower of the morning hits my back, I say a prayer to God. But that's really as an encompassing thing for all the angels. It's the godness. Yeah. It's the essence of the people that we're talking about. I'm not talking to a white man who sits on a cloud. No. I'm talking to the essence of what of all that is. All that is, yeah.
That's
I think that's what people struggle to get their head around. And I've always been careful in the podcasts in the past to say it's source energy, it's source, it's God, it's whatever it is, whatever name it is not a singular person.
No.
It is a collective consciousness. Of which there is superior consciousness within that.
Exactly.
And I think because in religion they would never use that, you know, that terminology. They need to have when religion was originally started, that fear factor, that intimidation of I'm the Lord of the Manor and I can take your house away, and here's a God who can do even more. You know, do as you were told, give me your money.
It was a political movement, absolutely. You're absolutely right. That's exactly it. And anything that's, you know, it's that sense of earthly power,
which power and intimidation and manipulation.
Exactly. And the manipulation is horrible. And if you think about the way Jewish women have to behave under a full set of rules, and, you know,
that is awful.
And in Islam too, and certainly in Hinduism and in Christianity, women often have a much lesser position. They're very much supposed to be kept in a place. You know, that's exactly what it is. And it's so sad. And I
because they're frightened of our power.
I think
women are quite powerful.
They are. I think that may well be, but there are an awful lot of women who feel very comfortable in that, and they're not the women that are going to be reading this book. What's going to be interesting is that people who are saying, I just don't get this. This doesn't feel comfortable for me. You know, I could never say those words, I'm worthy to gather up the crumbs under your table in the creed.
I never heard them. I used to sit in Sunday school and think to myself, this is a load of rubbish. I can remember, I can even feel it now. This is a load of rubbish.
But when we brought up, probably from the Anna, the Mother of Jesus, and Jane channeled Yeshua. I don't know if you heard that podcast. And it was because we were talking about it, and he was saying, I never meant for church or for church to be built in my name. It was only ever about community.
Exactly.
And although he wasn't dissing it, that wasn't his intention. It wasn't, I am the founder of the church. I'm just one other ascended master to come down to spread love and to teach people how to do it.
Exactly. And I think that's the trouble, is once it's a difficulty, isn't it? Because I've worked in a lot of non-government organisations, and I see that the same thing. What happens in a non-government organisation is a thing starts. So let's take HIV as an example. So we all started, and there was a group of gay men who started a group called Body Positive, and it was to support gay men who were positive. And fantastic organisation, absolutely based on love, absolutely based on shared experience, absolutely gorgeous. Really, I mean, every value you could possibly admire about care and love and support. But of course, what happens is the moment you start an organisation and it starts to get bigger, and then you have to have some money that comes in, and then you have to have somebody who manages the money, and then you have to think about ways you get other money, things start going wrong. And you always find within non-government organisations, they eventually bring in, like the Oxfams, like all those great big care organisations, you get people coming in who have to be a bit corporate to be able to keep this monolith going, and you lose the sense of what it all started off as being. And although the foot soldiers who are still working on the front line for Oxfam are still doing it for all the right reasons, the structure becomes out of control and difficult to manage and all those sorts of things. And that's exactly what happened, I'm sure, in the church. If Jesus was born and wanted to spread a message of love and care, and or same with if Siddhartha, when he sat by the river and suddenly realized there was more to this, he didn't want to be the person he had previously been as a rich prince, and he started thinking, I want to be able to change things. That always comes from a position of love, and Allah the same, and Muhammad. I mean, he absolutely, he wanted to spread this lovely love and to be able to say we're a community, we need to take care of our fellow man. All those messages are exactly the same.
Yeah. No.
And then you gradually get the next echelon, and then the money comes in, and then you get a power. And it's the same everywhere. We don't seem to be able, as human beings, to be able to organise ourselves into a big group without having negative influences coming in, which is another reason why working on your own personal path and occasionally coming to groups like this is so much better. Because what this kind of group helps you with is that you're working on your own personal path. And, I remember when I first came here and you were talking about numerology, and about which I know
Carolyn's very good at that.
And I'm thinking to myself, that's really interesting. I don't really know anything. So I went back and I read about it and had a little think about that and thought, well, that's interesting, isn't it? It's a way that I know, about magic numbers and things like that, and the way the Chinese have, 7 and all this sort of thing. Very, very interesting. All those things fascinating. So you pick up bits from people and you go on your own personal journey. And
that's what I had written down from when you initially started talking, is that when you're part of a church or part of an organisation, you're kind of on someone else's remit, you're on someone else's journey, and they're telling you where to walk and how to walk. And I think in that, when you're part of a doctrine, there comes also the ability to then go, well, this is what we have to think, so hence you're not doing that, so I'm going to judge you. Whereas when you're doing your own personal journey, and however wiggly that path is and up and down, and however you choose to do that, there's less likelihood to judge, because there isn't a this is the right path. It's actually, this is just my path, and this works for me, and it's making me a better person.
And if you're happy, the most basic thing of all this stuff is to be happy with your life.
I was saying to Leanne to Laurie in the podcast the other day about being fulfilled, and how society is buy this, do this because you'll be better looking and more happy and all this. And it's about making you feel less than. And I was talking about in kinesiology, when you use the goal statements and you're looking at where you want to be. So I am content, or I am flexible, or I love myself. And we're looking at the state of actually when they come into me, and those aren't their statements, and it's So conversely, it's I don't love myself, I am not fulfilled, I am not calm, I am not loving, I don't accept myself. Those are the people who are going into the work environment. Those are the people who are being husbands and wives and sisters and partners, and they're not content, they're not fulfilled, they're not this. And then what kind of the whole of society is based on that?
Well, they also affect everybody around you, because that's what's really
absolutely.
If you're in that environment, you end up by being affected by it. And that's what I was saying earlier on. You grow up, I tell my children this forever, you grow up despite your parents, not because of them. So the person that I just looked after, my friend who died very recently, he was still blaming his parents. If only my parents had been more loving, I wouldn't be in the mess I'm in now. He was 70 years old when he died, 71. And you just think, and I just felt so desperate that he died still believing that there was no hope from him from the beginning because he wasn't loved as a child. And you just think the damage that not just that his parents did to him, but also that he then did to himself.
That narrative that he
that
attached
narrative
himself
that,
to.
exactly. And so you must grow up despite them. I mean, parenting is a completely, it's not written down. You're just feeling your way. You're hopeless at it. All of us are hopeless at it. And
nobody comes in with an handbook.
No. And then, your children have got to take the best bits and try and work it out for themselves, which is why they eventually turn around and tell you that you've got it wrong, which is exactly how it should be. My kids have told me that, and they say, I'd never do that. I think, great, you have a go.
Yeah.
I remember someone saying to me, you don't give your children the childhood you think you do.
No,
so there's always,
exactly.
you can go into it with the best intentions, but there's always
you
going to
don't
be something.
want to
But
damage
you know
your
the other
children.
thing, the minute that cord's cut, they're not yours anymore.
Exactly, and you've got to recognise that your
got
job
their
is to
own
feed
path.
them, and you got to feed them and look after them and do all that stuff, and then you've got to send them out into the world, and you hope to God that something along the way helped. But if you have been a cruel parent, even inadvertently, then they're going to carry some of that rubbish, and they have to start looking around for a way of being able to ameliorate that and being able to say, I've grown up despite them. I found my own path. I found my own way of being.
Whilst we're on children, it's funny because having been brought up a Catholic, so it was very much church every Sunday and communion and Holy Communion and confirmation and all the structure that we went in. And, I remember spending my early childhood kneeling on the pew, and I wasn't tall enough. I used to suck. I remember the wax, the polish used to taste like. I used to suck the bit where they put the books. So for all the negativity that it has subsequently brought through my mother's interpretation or manipulation of it, so it wasn't necessarily, but the Catholic Church aren't great. I did question myself as a mother because I was like, I'm not going to raise my children Catholic. My mother wanted me to do all these things, but there was a part of me that thought, am I better giving them some structure? Taking them to church every now and then so they know there's something. And I always will still question this now, rather than them having nothing and they're getting through to going, I don't believe in God. So at least I think what the Catholic Church did give me was a belief in God. That wasn't the God my mother thought it was, because I then thought, actually, I'm going to have my own relationship with God. And, I read the Conversation with God and that totally changed everything. But it still at least existed in the first place. Whereas sometimes my kids are like, I don't believe in God. I think, have I done them a huge disservice?
I think there's two things there. One is I think children really love structure. I do think that, and maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I do think children really love structure. They want to know what's going to happen. They want to know what time they're going to be having tea. They want to know whether what time they go to bed. I think they love that structure. And church community offers a structure. The difficulty is that they listen to the indoctrination of the words. And that's the thing that really concerns me. And that doesn't matter what religion it is, that there's a form of indoctrination going on the whole time. And as a parent, I think the only thing you can do is constantly say, well, do you think that's right? And not say this is right and you're wrong, but to say, do you think that's right? Now, I brought my children up completely that Eleanor's a complete atheist, and she laughs if there's any kind of... I mean, it's embarrassing when we have to go to weddings and things because they say to me, what are the numbers on the wall there? What are they for? And I think, Yeah, and when do we stand up and we sit down? I think, like teaching them to use a knife and fork, it would have been quite useful to have actually given them some idea about what happens in a church, because they will come into contact with it. I mean, I have failed on that department. She's a complete atheist, and I think she always would have been. And I think she would have been really, really angry if I had put that into her, very, very much. Whereas Catherine is because she's always been a child of the universe. She has a concept of, a bit like Helen was talking about this morning, she has a concept of the earth. She's an earth child. And her father, even though he's logical, rational model, is an earth man. He's absolutely solid. His aura is brown. It's of the earth. He's happiest when he's 3/4 of the way up a mountain. He needs to be outside all the time. And so that's where there's a link between the two of them at that point, of the fact that they've got to be part of Earth. Catherine's got to have her hands in it, and Bob's got to be walking on it. And I think that's, he's complete atheist. He laughs at the whole idea of it. So it would have been totally inappropriate to have brought our children up in any religious way. But I think children find their own meaning of life.
Okay.
And I think I think the structure's lovely. And the family, communion going round and, having Sunday school and playing, painting and drawing. But, and the festivals are lovely. In all religions, the festivals are lovely because they bring families together. Everybody comes round, you share food, there's communion in sharing food. It's the message that's so toxic. And that's what's so difficult. And trying to unpick all that and say, well, there's a different way. I mean, both my girls laugh at me when I talk about the angels. They think it's completely ridiculous. Particularly Eleanor, obviously, who thinks the whole thing's a load of tosh. But they completely respect it. And Bob, who thinks it's a whole load of tosh.
He does.
But he came to you for healing.
He did.
And he absolutely respects the fact that I believe in it. Just coming today.
And he got it, though.
Yeah, absolutely he did.
He got it that day.
Because
Twice.
You came in through the earth.
Yeah.
And through his earthing. He's earthed to the ground. And I know it's all there. And Hermione talks about that with Bob as well, because he's like a gnome in the outside world. It's just this sort of thing. He's part of the world. And so I think they all respect it. And when I was coming here today, he was saying, well, why are you going today? And I was saying, well, because I think the conversation is so interesting. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I would never reject any of it. I'm just really interested in it. But the rest of it is I just think it's absolutely brilliant. And it's opened my life. And I'm so happy for that. And anybody who...
Actually, you don't get that in religion, do you? You don't get any form of conversation because you've been told what to think and what to do.
Yeah.
There's don't think for yourself. So actually, there's nothing to discuss.
And if you did, you'd be judged.
I think Christian groups in universities do sometimes have opportunities to discuss what's in the Bible and what it's about. I do think that there are aspects of religions where people have the opportunity to discuss. I mean, I think...
yes, but you're discussing a book that is written by, as you say, by white men, which is more forms so it's quite a limited discussion.
No, it is.
It's a small pool they're swimming around.
No, they are. But I do think they move in that direction, And the chap who married us, and the reason why he married me was because I asked him to marry us, was because he was a chaplain of King's College, Cambridge. I worked with him, but when you walked into he eventually was an ordinary vicar in Finsbury Park, but you walked into his house, and downstairs it was, he had, all his books and things like that, and where he met people from the congregation. But you walked up his stairs, and there was the most enormous Buddha at the top of the stairs.
Really?
With lights round and the whole thing. And I loved him for that. Because, and he'd say to me on the first day of term at Cambridge that all the undergraduate, some of the undergraduates rush up to him in their duffel coats and spotty faces and say, hello, Father, I'm a Christian. And he'd look at them and say, are you? I'm not. Because I'm not like you. And they would be in his dog collar, And I used to think to myself, now that is the most human being I have ever met in my life. I adored him. He looked like a saint. And he was just fabulous because of that. He just was so funny and lovely. And
well, that is it.
that is it, because he was all about love.
Yeah.
And I just
The
think it was
fun, the
wonderful.
times we've been told in here,
Yeah.
which probably you remember more than me, is the laughter.
I know.
It's not about us being pious
No.
and on our knees. It's about the laughter,
I know.
the joy. And I know they've given us that word loads of times.
That was my revelation when I read the Conversations with God, having had the Catholic indoctrination. And then when I got divorced, the priest, who had been a teacher actually, so he was much more had his feet on the ground, was saying, you have every right to be happy. And he totally went against all the sort of ruling of the church and my mother's ruling. So I read this book, and it was this revelation that God had a sense of humour. You know, I'd gone 35 years thinking that God was judgmental and I was going to hell for all sorts of different reasons.
And that,
reinforced
just hearing
constantly.
that, Malu, makes my heart, it makes me want to cry. 35 years of your life. I mean, that really hurts me terribly. I just think to myself, how terribly sad. I mean, I was sent to church, but I was never, there was no reverence in it. I just think it's so heartbreaking that so many people get to that.
And that's loads of people.
Yeah, and on your knees, on cold floors, begging for forgiveness.
Yeah, for what?
You are forgiven.
Yeah.
This the whole nature of forgiveness, and I learned this through really studying Buddhism, was the nature of forgiveness is that if you don't forgive yourself first, you know, there isn't anything to forgive. And there's a wonderful word in Buddhism called maitri, which means absolute love of yourself. And they're not saying, oh God, I'm so gorgeous. It's not that kind of love of yourself. It's just being with yourself and
but trying to
being
explain.
with yourself.
I mean, most of my time in here, when anybody comes for healing, that's where it starts. It's always about loving themselves. But they don't get it because they've come from this world of looking in the mirror thinking, is my hair?
I know.
Do I look all right? But they don't get that there's a difference in loving yourself from...
But when I say to Gordon, you can't give from an empty cup. So in order for your cup to be full, and I know he's an unusual case because of his pain, but you have to give to yourself. You have to give yourself time, you have to give yourself understanding, you have to make yourself important enough that you rest, that you eat the right food, that you do activities that feed your soul, in order for you to be a valuable, loving, sentient human being in all the roles that you have to do. That's loving yourself. It's making yourself important, not going, well, I deserve £100 pair of shoes and a new haircut, and am I handsome?
Yes, it's nothing to do with that, is it?
And actually,
but that's
my mother's
really
point of
hard
view,
to
she was
get
brought
someone.
up not to do that. Never complain, never explain. Your desires are not important.
Yeah.
When I got divorced, your happiness is irrelevant. You have a duty and responsibility to your family. That was her mantra. So yes, she was a particular generation. She's 85 this year, but there are still people younger who it'll be selfish. It'll be selfish, especially as women. I think that we're very much a nurturing. We give to our families. We don't necessarily have time to do for ourselves. And that's where I come from for my work is if you don't make yourself important, if you don't give to you, how on earth are you going to give to other people? That's loving yourself.
Absolutely. And the whole, I mean, my faintly ridiculousness, I find one of the most things I like about myself, and that I can amuse myself, you know, that I can sit there and laugh and laugh and laugh. At one of the lowest points in my life, when I came back from hospital, I had a brand new baby, I was in a wheelchair and I had a 4-year-old and I had no downstairs loo. And I remember sitting in the chair and thinking, this is just about as low as you could possibly be, because what the hell am I going to do? And I just burst out laughing, and I thought, I'm not even any good at being depressed.
Yeah, no, mate.
I mean,
That's it. I reckon that's why we get on.
Yeah, I think that's
Don't you?
I think so. I think
Because of all the time when we come back from Stuart's funeral, Rita, who's my stand-up comedian friend, pulled up in her car alongside the earth, and I can't remember what she did to me. Probably did something really sick. And I laughed. Well, I didn't laugh out loud. I smiled. I mean, if you can do that then, I mean, I think that's why I've always thought I'm a nutcase somewhere.
Well, no, I don't think it's a nutcase. It's just about the way your instant reaction
is to
it's
laugh.
much better to be, that's your choice,
Yeah,
rather than to self-destruction.
yeah,
I think that's the, sometimes when the chips are down,
the only thing you can do is laugh. It is.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
think to yourself, this is just so awful.
Well, I was saying to Jean this the story that I read on screen about a chap in a wheelchair, and someone saying, "Oh, do you feel restricted in your wheelchair? To ruin your life?" And he said, "Well, no, because if I was in a bed, I wouldn't be able to do anything. My wheelchair gives me freedom.
Exactly.
So rather than looking at us and poor me, I
Yeah.
can't walk around.
Yeah.
It's like lucky me, I get to move."
People always say that to me about having been in a wheelchair. They said, God, it must have been absolutely awful. And I said, no, actually, it was one of the best things I ever did. I had time to observe. It was a really fantastic learning experience. I mean, it would have been better if I could stand up. Obviously,
I think all
get on
those
carrying
things.
a baby and all that sort of stuff. But it was an amazing experience. I learnt what it was like to live as a disabled person, which informed all the work that I did for the next 10 years.
Wow.
I mean, it was a gift in a way. I mean, I'd rather it didn't happen, but it was no way a negative experience. And I was incredibly fortunate. I had help, and I had Catherine at 4 was amazing and took care of me. And I had somebody coming in who was just a beautiful soul to help me, who arrived on the doorstep. Hermione, who was in retreat, couldn't possibly have known that I was in this situation, turned up on my doorstep and said, "Do you want something?" I mean,
I'm not surprised.
no, but I mean, we do have that thing, she and I, and you just think so many things like that happened.
Yeah, and how could you not believe in something else?
Exactly. I mean,
And
it was so wonderful.
I mean, obviously we all know about what happened with Stu and all that stuff. And out of that came this. And how positive is this?
And even you could say that about your mother. If you hadn't had, I mean, I'm not going to dish your mother. She's your mother. You're allowed to diss him as well. But if you hadn't had that experience, you wouldn't, and also have been a very strong person in your own right and had a shiny soul, you couldn't have arisen above that. And you have done all this because that was where you came from.
Yeah.
And that.
No, except I've forgiven her. I'm not full of business, but just for the sake of what we're talking about, it's for me, it's just an example of how people can use that.
Exactly.
But it leads me on to the point that when I was saying about my children and not giving them something so they don't believe in anything, and we've talked about this before, more often than not, and it would be interesting to look at the statistics of it, people find what we do now, find spirituality through trauma. I mean, you've covered this in the book that you wrote. It's more through a circumstance, whether it be an illness or a divorce or a traumatic experience, as in I'm on my knees, someone help me. And so it saddens me in a way that, especially if say, take my children, for example, I don't want them to find God because of a traumatic experience. It's their path. I have no control over that. But wouldn't it be better, whether at 5, 15, 20 or 30, if they go, I know I'm supported. So I'm constantly telling my children, poor Daisy, when you're at school, if you're in trouble, what do you do? Yeah, mummy, ask the angels to stand close. She looks at me. And it's like, let's use
That's
that.
good.
Use that now to support you rather than having to wait to be on your knees, because they're always there.
I think that's true, but I do think there are people, when the years when I used to teach about sexuality, that, sexuality is a continuum, and there are some people who, the day they're born, are gay, and there are some people who realise it over a long period of time, and there are some people who find the whole idea of consciousness, find it, can't even bear it. And I think there are some people who were born already on a spiritual path, and I think there are people like Helen, who's talking about the fact that she knew right from the very day she's part of the world, she's a mermaid, and Catherine is the same. And Catherine would never describe what she does as what I do, why I had the way I live. She would say, "Oh, that's just mummy stuff," but she lives it. She doesn't even need to use the words.
No.
She lives it. She is it. She's a child of the universe. And I knew that the day I saw her at 1.5 pounds in her incubator. She was there, and I just thought, oh my God, she's a fairy. She really is a sparkly fairy. It's unbelievable. It's so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I think the work that you two are doing is just really, really interesting. And I'm so glad that I think you had huge courage to be able to say, I'm going to start, I'm going to do it. I'm going to actually reach out there and say.
2 years ago,
I know.
when I said that,
But you did. It takes a lot of courage, and it was the next stage, and you knew you had to speak to a bigger audience, and that's the same thing for you in saying you knew there was. I remember you telling me when I was doing the interview for the book, and you were saying that you there had to be more. It had to be different. It had to be something more. That there was that element in you. So maybe we're all born with some of it in us. Some of us start off that way, and lucky old them. And the rest of us it sort of picks away at your life.
And I think it's also it is that knowing. I think we've covered this. We've always had that knowing, because when I made that decision to get divorced and I had that tiny flame, it was like, oh, there you are. So despite how small it was, I know that's the truth for me, because I recognise it. It was always part of me, but all the other voices, the indoctrination, life, parents, whatever it is, my narrative, the paradigms were so loud that I couldn't hear it. And almost that the trauma of getting divorced, and whether it be illness or whatever, it kind of shatters that, and it allows that knowing to come to the surface. And whereas other people, you were born with that knowing, or
I think that's why I had the parents I had. I absolutely believe it 100%, because they didn't parent me and they didn't need
because
to.
they allowed that knowing to just exist.
Yeah, they never. My mum, in all her years, never once said to me, "Well, where have you been then?" Just, you have to be in before dark. That was it. Nothing else.
It is amazing where all these stories come from. I think
it is, and when I look back on that, I had a marvellous childhood, really. There was nobody standing over my shoulder going, "You don't do it like that," because I don't
Whereas
think...
nowadays you'd be accused of lack of care and lack of love.
Emma says to me, always, my daughter, "I don't know how you didn't end up in a children's home." Well, I didn't.
Well, because I think it's also the way. I mean, Bob
It was
brought
the way
up like
then,
that. I mean,
wasn't
you're the same age as Bob, and he was brought up in Cornwall, and his mum had three. There were three brothers, all about the same age, and his mum used to open the door in the morning.
Yeah,
see
that's
you
what
at
they
tea time.
did.
And of course, kids were allowed to do that. It was only since we've got obsessed with risk that
I think it's
problem.
also, it makes me think about. So yes, extreme is the helicopter parent who controls and creates and loves their child with all this, and they think they're doing it through love. It could be from fear, it could be through lots of things. But it reminds me of a lady I know who homeschools her boy. He's probably 11 or 12, and he's this long-haired, looks like a native Indian, and he's so connected to the world. I mean, I don't know him, I know her, but you can see that from the photographs of what he does. She puts her first day of school photograph and he's on the surf, and and she always says, this is not an easy journey to homeschool my child, and this freedom that she gives him, and he has taught her so much, and she exalts in this. He is such an amazing person because he's been not even given a framework. He's been given a lack of framework in order to evolve into this incredible, sentient, bright, extraordinary person that you would have put into a box of the school and killed that creativity or that.
And I think that's what makes people become ill. Absolutely makes people become ill. I can completely see that, kids that have mind freezes, if you like, in early adolescence, and that goes on sometimes until they've left and they're in their 20s and being able to do what they want to do. And so often the school system has destroyed them or kept them in a box or been difficult for them.
I passed the 11 plus and I was supposed to go to the local grammar, but I was born in the bulge year after the war, and there was no places. And I lived just out the catchment area, and that was the way they got them there to, for the numbers. So, because I was obviously quite bright, they thought, they sent me to a school in the city to have the exam. And I must have been so knowing then. It must have all been kicking off. I walked in and I thought, they have got to be joking. They're not putting me in here. I felt like it was an institution. The desks were all the same part. And I expect it was a bit like that for Darren when he went to Bancroft's, different kettle of fish though. And they was all walking about in their mortarboards and the cloaks. Oh my God. I didn't even put my name on the paper. It was an exam, and I remember not even being able to write my name. I thought, they're not. They can't put me in here. It was like, for me, it was an institution. I was a nut, off after school swimming in the park on my own, that great big Victoria Park. Do you know it?
I do.
That's where I used to go to the ladder. I could not have thought of anything worse. And now I think, thank God I had that knowing.
I think it's really, really important to have
The freedom.
The freedom. It is about freedom, but it's freedom it's freedom to be able to let your spirit fly, and that's what you're talking about, like your friend's son, is that allowing your children to let their spirit fly. I mean,
which can be quite frightening for people.
I think so.
Because someone says, youngest of 5 children, and I read once that parents of large families of children, they tend to create discord, because actually to have 5 or plus children who are all on the same page can actually almost be a threat to you. So our family was, well, you're the bossy one, she's the selfish one, he's the artistic one, she's the angry one, he's the unemotional one, and they were constantly setting us against, subtly and also consciously probably, so because they don't want us to gang up, they didn't want us to all
it's really interesting how those narratives continue even after you've left home. I was the messy one who couldn't organise her way out of a paper bag. So it's a shock to my siblings that I've got a PhD. They how on earth did you do that? In fact, my brother had the audacity to call me a late developer at one point, which was such rubbish because I'd been working my guts out since I was 16 years old. Before that even, and they organised, and brought up 3 children and 2 children. I wasn't Freudian slip, and brought up my children and did a full-time job and all the other things that you have to be a little bit organised to be able to do that.
Yes.
And they still see me as a sort of, well, my sister now calls me the nutty professor. She cannot get it out of her head that I can't do any of these things. And I remember a little while ago, she was at my house and I was hanging out the washing. She said to me, I never think of you doing things like this. As if I hadn't got the ability to be able to do the washing and hang it up. I mean, it was quite extraordinary how that narrative that you were brought up with, the bossy one, it stays with you forever.
Because I suppose if they question your narrative, they have to question their own.
It's really
the whole deck of cards comes down.
It does, and it's a really
and some people can be quite lazy. And I talked to my neighbour about her siblings, again, all in their 50s, and all that set in stone. Thinking, who steps out of that? So.
My brother-in-law, who's got some mental health problems, he's my brother's twin, my husband's twin, and he was dyslexic, and he was beaten with ropes with knots on at school because he thought he was thick and all that horrible traditional stuff, and has had mental health issues for many, many years. He is by far the cleverest of the 3 of them.
He would have been.
He's very, very able and seeing and bright. I mean, he's lived to the outside world a very sad life, but I think he has a very rich inner life. And you can't ask him about it, of course, because he doesn't talk, but he's fantastic. He's an extraordinary human being, and I really enjoy being near him. Very, very interesting man, because he's silent, he's terribly diffident and he's definitely got mental health problems, but he's just a shiny
but
soul.
Again, being part of that narrative of the family, you lose that individuality. They don't look at you as a person.
No,
you are the youngest, the eldest, the tricky one, the this.
Yeah,
and that's it. It's like, actually, I'm a person. Someone I got judged for getting divorced at 35. I want to say to them, I'm a 35-year-old woman with 3 children. You raised me, for God's sake. You'd like to think you did a good job, that I knew my own mind. I know what I'm doing. Exactly. And I know what I'm doing is for the right reasons.
Exactly.
It's like my dad saying the other day, I didn't know that. It's like, well, I'm 50. I do know a thing or two.
One or two.
Yes.
Yes, 50.
And that's where I think I go back to that when I'm with my brothers. Yeah. Although I play up to it a little bit because I'm laughing on the other side of my face thinking, you bleeding idiot. Or whatever, because they've made it in the whatever corporate world, got loads of money, that's all they know. They don't know about this stuff. No. They don't know what I do, other than talk to Tracy without a telephone.
But it's about that's it's very similar in my family about money. How much money you earn.
Yeah.
just neither of my girls are likely to earn very much money. You don't get much as an artist who lives in the middle of a field. So my brother and his sister was, how much is she ever going to earn? How's she going to live? And for her, money isn't an issue.
And that's that measure. I can't measure her. I can't label her.
That's right. It's
and
measuring.
that's part of that
right.
religion thing is you have a label, or I'm a this, I'm a that, because you can't relabel. Even spirituality, I sometimes feel guilty about saying it because I don't want to label it, because it is a knowing, it is living your truth, and it's kind of the easiest label
How
to
can
put
you
on.
put a label on it?
Well, you can't.
I think that's the thing, is one shouldn't put a label on it. I don't think there is a label.
And actually, and for your daughter is happy and content and probably an incredibly loving and sentient a person. That's all you want your children to be. You don't care where she lives or what she earns. And that's your measure. But for other people, does she have a car? She doesn't earn over 20,000. But that doesn't mean that she's relevant or this.
Exactly. Absolutely
it's
right.
extraordinary, isn't it?
What's she going to do at the end of this? Yes, what's she going to do at the end of this one? I said, well, she'll have to find herself another job, and she will.
Where's her line of future? It's like, you make
and
your
of course,
own.
for this generation now, there are no jobs. So there will be nothing for them. And that's the thing now, is that all those measures that when you're talking about revolution, all those measures that we previously judged people by, we cannot do it. My daughter has 2 master's degrees, the younger one, and she applies for jobs. There are 4,000 applicants for every single job, and the applications are all looked at by a computer. So there's nobody even looking at them thinking, is this person better than this person? There's just a tick box exercise, and eventually a couple spew out on somebody's desk somewhere. There's really, that's the difficulty, is that all those measures that we had from our generation and being able to say, well, they are this much, and the labels and everything, those have all fallen to one side. It's a whole new world now of how you get
even
judge people.
It's slightly relevant. I met my husband online, and you chatted by sort of message with people, and all the men would say to me, well, this is the car I drive and this is how much I'd earn. I go, why are you telling me that? I don't want to know. I'm not interested. All women want to know. Going, no, not me. And what got me with Gordy was he'd have a little paragraph about who I am and what I like, and it was like barbecue with friends, dogs, hanging out with all people I love. I thought, that's the man for me. Because it was his values, not how much he drove, but all that generation. It's like to have.
It is, but I do think that's going to have to change. I think we're going to be absolutely forced to do that. And again, it's about it doesn't come generated from us, sadly. It comes enforced from the outside again because of what's happening to the world, or what is happening to the world. I think it's the next 10, 15 years are going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. I mean, I don't know whether I'll be around to see them, but I would be really.
Me and Charlie.
It's a pity because I'm so interested in how it's going to develop, and it's about their world and what they're going to do. It's going to be fascinating to see how we learn to live again. And I hope that this will be part of it, that people will find some kind of meaning by working through it on their own with a little help from outside. And
and how empowering is that to have that, to actually have your faith or your rock. And for me, I always used to call meditation my telegraph poles, and my life in between was the wire. It kept me sane. It was my solidity. And whatever that be, whether that be fishing or something that makes me a better person. And that's what I need. If the world were full of better people who are fulfilled and love themselves in order to then give, I think that's the basis we need. So if my children are going, Mum, I'm happy to live in a caravan and do this job, and because that makes me happy. Fine.
And me.
That's what
there is no. I've never pinned anything on it.
No. It's really important to be able to do that, to be at peace. Because inevitably, if you are somebody who is a child of the universe, it's a horrible cliched expression, I don't mean it, but you know what I mean. If you are of the earth, the stuff of the expectation stuff, money, you always feel that you failed. And that's Catherine's problem, is that she always feels that she's a failure, that we, even us, and she knows we don't give a shit, will think that she's a failure. You know? And I think
the society's telling you that.
I know.
That's what informs all the media, the advertising, the social media. If you're thin, then you're valuable. If you've earned this or earning this. look
It
like
is
this,
terrible.
own this.
Just
Yeah.
try and keep yourself healthy. And we've learned this through this whole situation, is that you've got to your job in terms of your bodily self is to try and keep yourself healthy. Do your very best. We all fail at that as well, because who doesn't like 2 biscuits, I think,
I know.
and all this sort of stuff. But I'm normal. But you've got to have those kind of things. You've got to be able to try and keep yourself healthy and have a sense of merit. This business about being, that you're actually quite comfortable with being who you are. And
I think that's the most important thing. Being liking
yourself.
And that
what
health
you've
isn't just physical; it's mental and it's spiritual.
Yeah,
It's
it
feeling that
is.
sense of belonging
yeah.
and something, and knowing that you're part of something greater. I mean, years ago, before I got into this, when I first came to Devon, and if I went to a psychic, friend would go, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Because I want to feel I'm part of something greater. Because otherwise, life could feel overwhelming.
It's
if it's just
terrible.
little old you against the world,
Yeah.
it can be pretty scary.
It is scary.
But when you, a bit like our discussion before lunch, when you know you're part of something greater, and that you combine your energy with that, you can take on the world.
Exactly. And one of the, people say to me, "How was your lockdown?" Actually, it was fab, because I went out every day and I talked to the trees all the way around. Every single tree I passed, I said, "Hello, good morning, how are you?"
The elementals love you.
I did. And then it became so ridiculous that I started laughing. So I was laughing. So it did me so much good. I got so excited. Because we were allowed an hour and whatever it was. I broke all those rules, but I was out as much as I could. I'd get up and I'd be out of the house, and then I'd do the same walk, so I get to know all these trees. And I was on one of the walks last night, and I went back and said, "Oh, we're changing seasons now. You've done your work, haven't you?" And I was thinking to myself, "Jesus, I'm going bonkers."
You're public football.
And I did. And I had such a good lockdown because I was so excited about talking to the trees. I think you have to take that huge joy in yourself. And I love being with myself in that way. I am as normal as the rest of the people when I look in the mirror sometimes. I think, "My God, what's happened to my knees? They're down here." And that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm completely okay. I was brought up with a mother who judged you by your looks. So, I think to myself, I've got this beauty spot here that used to be up here. But that amuses me. I just think to myself that it's funny.
Who's that looking at me in the mirror?
Yeah, you can't do anything about that. I just want to be allowed to be me. And that's just, Janie, who makes messes and gets it all wrong. All that stuff.
Me.
Yeah.
And that's to be okay.
It's
It is
for
okay
me.
though.
It's only when people
Well, it's
go,
okay
"Don't
for us.
they?" Yeah.
We love it.
And there's only one way out of here, and it's in a box, or whatever. I mean, all that stuff. I take huge joy in those kind of things, and I think that is what life is all about.
Do you know what I really think? I've lived till I'm 73. My dad didn't make that many years.
No.
My son didn't.
No.
That is an accolade.
We are, and also we're so lucky to be able to still enjoy life and have some of that. And I put too many of my friends in the ground in the last 2 years, and I think I just think I'm really sorry that my lovely friend Ross and Ian and everybody didn't make it, because every day is so precious.
It is.
Thank you so much for listening to the Hera Hotspot podcast. I hope you enjoyed our chat. Until next time, take care.